Thank you, Royal. And I think the theme is get involved. So when something becomes very successful like open source is today, and it's game over, and everyone's winning at open source, and we all think it's going to last forever, it's always there, we have to then step back and say, how do we sustain this wonderful asset called open source? How do we make sure that it's there when we need it? So I'll talk about how can we all be good citizens? And it's a journey. I am still working on it. I've been involved in open source since '98, and I help guide companies in their journey to open source, in helping them engage better with open source, contribute back to open source, etc. So let's talk about two big ideas that open source is built on. And it's important to understand those ideas because that then frames for us what we need to do to be good citizens and how do we maintain open source. So the two big pillars that open source is built on are the licenses, the open source definition that started giving freedoms to people to examine, to redistribute, to modify, and to use it for any purpose, and other freedoms. And that freedom is what created this vast, vast ocean of open source code, science, etc., that we all depend upon and we all use. Without those licenses, open source would not be in existence. And then the second big thing that identifies open source to me is a very collaborative development model where people are working across the globe, across organizations, on common things, on common purposes, and often done in public. And I say often because some of these methodologies are being taken inside companies as well to develop proprietary code, and it's called inner source. So these are two big ideas in open source, and that's what then creates the commons. A common asset like national parks, like the ocean, like the earth, which gives us a chance to benefit from this common asset that is created across the world. And one of the premises of this common asset is that collaborative development model, and it requires that all of us not only consume, but that we contribute in various ways. I think as Royal indicated, it's not just code. You can do lots of other ways of contributing and sustaining open source. And so frankly, if we do not fulfill that virtuous cycle, open source goes away, and the common assets that we all depend upon goes away. In organizations, whether it's universities or companies or governments, really struggle to contribute. And most of us, and I'll be honest, all of us, consume a lot more than we contribute. It's very easy to consume. It helps us accelerate our roadmaps. It helps us get more work done. It's easy to download and use. But many of us don't take time to understand what it means to be a good citizen and what it means to contribute back and to engage with communities, with open source foundations, etc. And sometimes it's a question of not knowing how to do it, or it's too much effort to do it, and we can't business justify it. One of the things open source program offices do in companies is to nudge people across the company and to say, hey, if you're using this open source, are you contributing back? Are you establishing a relationship with the project that you're dependent upon? Are you engaging? Are you making sure that you are being a good citizen? So that's one of our jobs. And frankly, we do that because I think organizations of all kinds can make a huge impact if they actually participate and give back and they contribute to open source. And if we don't do that, what happens is open source is not there as an asset anymore. And we see this time and time again. Maintainers, someone recently coined the word accidental maintainers. Most of them are accidental. They came into it because they wanted to create some technology or solve a problem, an itch to scratch. And then they find themselves in a position of satisfying corporate users and users across the world, and they've never been trained in community management. They've not been trained in working with so many people, and they're doing it often on the weekends or evenings, and so you can see how burnout happens. So you also find that if you do not participate, projects then become dominated by either one organization or one type of voice. And then you soon find yourself reacting to that direction or that voice. And if we don't have our voices heard, that's what happens, which then leads to a lack of diversity of voices, opinions, directions, not just gender, global, different aspects of a project. And frankly, I think innovation is fueled by open source, and we would have lack of growth and innovation in technology, in science, in data, in so many different fields if we don't participate. So how can you be a good citizen? I think understanding what the project or the foundation that you depend upon needs is important. Go meet them where they are. And support can be many, many things. It can be money, it can be space, it can be evangelizing the project, it can be sponsorship, it can be scholarships, it can be code. So there are many, many different ways to support your foundation or your project. And helping it also earns trust and builds a partnership with that organization. And by the way, there's so many, many benefits. It's an enlightened self-interest for organizations to participate. You have influence, you have a seat at the table, your voice is heard, and as Royal indicated, it's a huge recruitment avenue. We recruit a lot from the projects we open source, and the developers that get involved in those projects, they already know the code we're working on, they know the kinds of things we do, and their work is visible. Not just coders, but community developers, evangelists, developer advocates. My job was because, of open source. I spend 100% of my time on open source. Sustaining a key dependency is an important enlightened self-interest for many companies. If I'm completely building my business on this particular project, should I not make sure that project is sustained and it's alive and well? And securing the supply chain is becoming more and more important, because if we don't know where our components are coming from and we don't know where we use it, it's hard to fix it. And technical debt is another enlightened self-interest aspect. If you fork from the mainstream, you end up holding the bag on all of those codes and all of those edits. Why not put it back? If you talk to any IP lawyer, they'll say, there are not too many things that really should be kept inside a company. Most of these things can be put back over time sometimes. And frankly, the soft aspects of goodwill, of being a good citizen, and the trust that you build pays back in many ways. And I'm really excited to be here with the O3DE project, because I think many of you are here because you believe in this project. And sometimes a lot of us companies will become a member of a project and then we forget it. And then next time when the renewal comes, we go back to it and say, what did we do and what did we get out of that project? And I think it's important to examine, how can I actively participate in this project? Who from our organization is actively participating in the technical side, in the marketing side, in the funding side, and not just to pay the check and then leave, but to actively drive the direction of the project and actively engage with the project. And it's super exciting that universities are getting involved, gamers and artists, and so many different communities to build a commercial ecosystem, to build an open source ecosystem around O3DE. So thank you so much for having me here, and I hope you got a sense of why it's important to be involved and and what the payback from being involved is, and how we all can work together to sustain open source.